Good morning and welcome back. Today I hope to finish the pair of pause tongs that we started in yesterday's video. Last night our promised colder weather came in and it's considerably colder in the shop today. That may affect how easily this goes a little bit. A lot of this is done at the vise and it's going to be hard to keep good high heats most of the time. So I'm going to use a torch for a lot of this so I can work right at the vise and not lose heat going from the forge to the vise. You can certainly do this in the forge and do some selective cooling, and I'll explain why that's important as we get to those steps. So if you've completed your homework assignment from yesterday, you should have two tong blanks that look about like what these do, and I'll show a close-up here in a second. They don't look anything like tongs. It's probably a little bit confusing, but today the magic is going to happen, and very quickly you'll start to see how these form pause tongs. Now I did clean this up a little bit. I did a little bit of filing on there. You can file or grind just to make sure everything is clean and even thickness and that the tip is 90 degrees to this edge. That's all fairly important stuff. You definitely want this end as close to each other as possible. These should be an exact match left and right. If the reins are not a perfect match, that is not as big a deal. Since I've had the forge going this morning, it's actually kind of warming up in this little area here. So I think I'm going to shed a few layers of clothes because this is really hard to work with all this extra stuff on. Then we're going to get into our project. Okay, that's a little bit better. So the first thing we want to do with our tong blanks is we want to put a very controlled bend in the end of each blank. And that first bend looks something like this. It should be 90 degrees between here and here. And to do this, you need a very controlled heat. If you don't have a good controlled heat, you're going to end up bending it here and you're going to have problems. So where we want to heat this really is just right through this area. Just the part that needs to bend. And that's very critical, and that's why a torch is so handy for doing these. If you do these in the forge, just quench this in water up to here and quench the tip in water up to there, and it'll be just fine. It just takes a little bit more effort. So this is where we need our 1/2-inch bending fork, and we bend this. We're going to put this in here and bend it all the way around until we get that 90-degree angle in there. Again, heating with the torch is ideal. It will take a hair longer than heating in the forge, but it's very controlled. Just a matter of putting it in the bending fork. And this does want to twist, so you may have to go to the anvil and straighten that twist out. And then go back to the fork and finish the bend. So you want a 90-degree angle right there. It kind of gets stuck on the fork, but that means everything's perfect. Next we want to back bend this so that the jaw where the V-bit will be is more or less parallel with the reins. So to do that, we'll put this back in the bending fork this way, and we bend here. Now this is where it really matters to have a controlled heat. If your heat is out here in this part, it wants to bend here where it's thinner, but you really need it to bend back here where it's thicker. So again, you need a very controlled heat in this area. Not quite to this point. You don't want to, if you heat that, this is going to want to bend here. So this is real important. Of course, getting a good high heat on this makes it easier to bend and more likely to bend where the heat is than somewhere else that's just thin and wants to bend because it's thin. So something like that. And of course you'll probably need to flatten this out at the anvil just like you did before. That's really what we're going for. The next thing we have to do is refine this shape, try and get a little bit of an upset into here, and that'll take that little bump out. And to do that we need our little spacer that we made, and we'll work this way. And you'll see right now that's way too tall, and it all needs to be down until this is tight to the spacer and the rein is tight to the anvil. So that's what that's all about. I think I'm going to put a wedge in there to hold that tighter. When I wedge that in, it's good and tight. It's going to have to be hammered back out of there now. And then that'll stay put for us. You can chase it around the anvil. It absolutely is possible to do it without that fitting tight. If I was going to make a lot of these, I'd make one that perfectly fit the hardy hole. Before we go on to that though, let's go ahead and do this other blank and get it to match this. But let's do this in the forge with controlled cooling instead of controlled heating with a torch, and just see how that's a little bit different. So this means that you have to cool the areas that you don't want to bend. And of course doing this allows some of the other stuff to cool off at the same time, so it's a little bit of a back and forth. You might have to go back to the forge, get it hot, and do this again. But it does work. And take this to the bending fork. By the way, this is a heater for livestock watering troughs, and I put it in my slack tub, and that keeps it from freezing even though it's going to be below zero tonight. And that's cooled down enough. I'm going to have to heat it up some more. I'm actually bending back here in the rain. So that's one of the problems with doing it this way. There's just a little bit more fiddling and fussing and things cool down, whereas with a torch you're just right here the whole time. So we've gone back to the slack tub and back to the forge. Now we can complete that bend. First I'll flatten this out again. Remember, I don't want to flatten where we let that upset. I want to be careful about that. That gets everything back in line nicely. Then we'll do our controlled heat and bend here. And see if we can get back to the vise before that cools off too much. And again, we'll probably have to heat this twice. Oh, definitely. On a warmer day, that probably wouldn't cool down quite so badly. I think we'll be okay with that. So now it's time to make this fit between the face of the anvil and the spacer, and that upsets this jaw area, or that upsets the boss area just a little bit. So here again, you want a controlled heat right in here and not out here, not back here. So it's the same thing, either heat it with a torch or controlled quenching. But then when we have our heat in here, we will forge here. So that'll forge all that down, and that provides just a little bit of an upset in the boss. So hopefully I can do this without my arm being too much in your way. You're kind of working back this way as much as you can. This gives you a chance to also refine this funny little lump that ends up there. So That's pretty much the idea. We need to keep going until this sits flat on the spacer. And I'm working with both halves here, so if it doesn't look like the one I just finished, there's a reason for that. And because my slack tub is nice and close to the anvil, I'm just going to the slack tub and using controlled cooling instead of heating with a torch. Either one would work wonderfully. I think that's pretty good there. Make sure everything's flat and in line. So in an ideal world, we now have two perfectly matching tong halves. I don't know if that is true or not. They're pretty darn close. Yep. Anything that needs to be fixed here, if it's a problem, can be fixed with a file. These are just almost perfect through there. So the next thing we want to do is chisel cut right down the center here. And we want to cut it deep enough for whatever size stock we're using. 1/4 inch stock doesn't need a very deep cut. 3/8 stock needs to be deeper, half deeper than that, and so on. And that's why you let this upset a little bit. That just gives you more material here so that this isn't so thin and weak when you're done. Otherwise it'd be an 1/8 inch or less when you're done. So we're going to clamp these up in the vise. The aluminum spacers really help hold it solid. One of you folks out there in YouTube land sent those. I appreciate them. So try and center a line right down the middle. This may take several heats to get it to open up just right. The first thing to worry about, though, is just getting a mark you can follow that is centered. And we're going to do this with both of them, but I don't think I'll show chiseling both of them. It looks the same, and since this will be 3 or 4 heats, you'll see a lot of this. As you make progress with this, it will hold much tighter in here. And this is another place, if you're going to make a lot of these, you could probably make a set of inserts that has a little support right under there, just the right angle, and it would hold it and not slip at all. Part of the problem with this is it's a little thicker back here, so it's not clamping the jaw quite as tight as I would like it to. But persistence will get us there. I'm going to try something a little bit different here. You can see how this is starting to bow up back there. So I'm going to forge that back down over a Hardy. And yes, I'd normally do this in the anvil, but I've still got that spacer solidly wedged in there. That worked out pretty well, and that pretty much finished our cut for us. Hardys certainly aren't made for use in a vise. But I think I'm pretty happy with that. So with a reasonable little V-cut in there, the next thing to do is to open it up to 90 degrees. The easiest way to do that is just with a little piece of square bar. And we're going to refine this a little bit more after we assemble the tongs. So you don't have to get this perfect at this point. Just enough that you'll be able to hold this piece of bar later. So, we are pretty darn close to being ready to assemble the tongs. Because these have deformed a little bit, they're no longer perfectly in line. So I'm going to go ahead and clean that up real lightly. Don't mess up your chisel cut. You're just trying to get everything back in line. That's pretty much it. We're going to let these cool, and then we're going to put them together. Well, I'd hoped to finish our tongs in today's video, but it's been about 3 hours of video production and shop time. I'm going to go ahead and call this good for today instead of trying to rush it and skip some of the important steps. I think people appreciate the detail, so we'll have a part 3, and hopefully then we'll assemble it. Really isn't much to do, other than these can be real fiddly in the final steps, and that's liable to be another 15 or 20 minutes worth of video, just getting the adjustments right so they work the way they're supposed to. Take the blanks that you made yesterday and turn them into blanks that look like this, and then tomorrow we'll all be ready to assemble our tongs at the same time. I do hope you enjoyed the video and can give it a thumbs up. If you haven't done so already, I would love it if you hit that subscribe button. Feel free to stick around, watch a few of the other videos, share the videos with your friends, but then get out to the shop, do your homework, and we'll get back to this project, hopefully in the next video. But work safely, wear your safety glasses, and we'll see you for the next one. If you would like to support Black Bear Forge financially, you may do so by clicking the links down in the description of the video to either PayPal or Patreon. Those are merely donations, there's no obligation, the content will remain free.